I'm 85 years old, and I want to tell you about the day I realized I had been left behind. Not because life dealt me a bad hand, but because I let it happen, and then I decided to do something about it. My name is Harold. I've lived in the same house in Columbus, Ohio for nearly 50 years. I worked as an engineer at a manufacturing plant for 32 years, raised 2 sons and a daughter with my wife Dorothy, and buried her 7 years ago. For the past few years, I've been living alone in this house, the same house where it used to be noisy and full, where Dorothy made pot roast on Sundays, where the kids ran down the hallway and woke me up before I was ready. Now it's quiet. It took me a while to understand that quiet comes in different forms. There's the quiet of peace, and there's the quiet that tells you something has gone wrong. I couldn't tell them apart for a long time. I'd sit in my recliner, look out the window, and wait for the phone to ring. It didn't ring much. The kids called on holidays, sometimes just to check in, but the calls were short. Visits were even rarer. There was always a reason: work, the grandkids' schedules, the drive, the distance. And every time I said, "Don't worry about it, you've got your own lives." But I didn't mean it. I just didn't know how to say anything else. The truth was, it hurt. Not because they're bad people. My kids are good people, I have no doubt about that. But somewhere along the way, a wall had grown up between us. Quietly, year by year, without anyone announcing it. And I didn't know which side of it I was supposed to approach from. I tried to think back to when it started. Probably before Dorothy passed. When I was busy with work, and then busy with retirement, which sounds strange, but retirement can keep you occupied if you fill it the wrong way. The kids grew up and scattered. My older son is up in Chicago. The younger one moved out to Denver, and my daughter married and settled in Charlotte. All of them doing fine, all of them living their lives. And I stayed here with my recliner, my television, and my silence. There was one moment I remember very clearly. It was fall, October. I got sick. Nothing serious, a cold, a fever, a few days in bed. I didn't call the kids because I didn't want to be a bother. A week later, my older son called and asked how I was doing. I said, "Fine, feeling better." He didn't ask, "Better after what?" He just moved on to his own news, told me about a project at work, mentioned one of the grandkids, and said goodbye. I hung up the phone and sat there thinking. He didn't even know I'd been sick. That wasn't anger I felt. It was something colder than that. A clear, quiet realization. We had become strangers to each other, not enemies, just people living parallel lives. Loving each other, I believe that, but with no real idea of what was happening on the other side. And then I asked myself, what had I done to let them know? That was an uncomfortable question. I'd always assumed children come back to their parents, that it's the natural order of things, that I'd done my part, raised them, put them through school, sent them out into the world. Now it was their turn. But sitting in that quiet, I started to see that waiting is also a choice. And that choice had been making me lonelier than I needed to be. I won't pretend I changed overnight. That would be a lie. It happened slowly, awkwardly, with mistakes along the way. The first thing I did was call. Not on a holiday, not because something was wrong, just to call. I phoned my daughter on a Wednesday morning. She was surprised. First thing she said was, "Dad, is everything okay?" Because a call out of nowhere meant bad news in her mind. I said, "Everything's fine. I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause. Then she laughed, a little uncertain but warm, and we talked for almost an hour. What struck me about that conversation was how ordinary it was. I asked about her job, about the kids, about the screened-in porch they'd been adding on to the back of the house. Small things. But at the end she said, "Dad, I'm really glad you called. I miss you." I hadn't heard those words in probably 10 years. That's when I understood something simple that I somehow hadn't known through all those years. Closeness doesn't sustain itself. You have to tend to it. Like a fire, if you stop adding wood, it goes out. Not because anyone is at fault, it just goes out. I started calling more regularly. Not in a way that felt like pressure. I didn't want to be the kind of father whose name on the screen made his kids hesitate, but consistently, once a week to each of them. And I tried not to just talk about my own aches and routine. I asked questions, real questions, and I actually listened to the answers. That part took practice too. Listening not to respond, but just to be present with someone. Our generation wasn't taught that. We were taught to work hard, keep going, and not complain. Listening is a different skill entirely. About a month in, my younger son texted me. He usually calls, so a text stood out, and asked if I wanted to come out to Denver for a weekend. No occasion, just a visit. I went. We drove up into the mountains on Saturday, cooked steaks on the grill that evening, watched a game. His wife made an apple cobbler and insisted I take the recipe home. My grandson sat next to me on the couch and tried to explain some video game I couldn't follow, and we both ended up laughing about it. It was a perfectly ordinary weekend. But driving back to the airport, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. That I wasn't a visitor in someone else's life. I was part of it. Gradually, something shifted in me, too. I noticed I was spending less time thinking about why they didn't come around more, and more time thinking about what I could do myself. That didn't mean the hurt was gone. But I stopped feeding it with expectation. I found things to do. For a long time, I'd turned down any kind of offer from the neighbors. A walk around the block, coffee on the porch. It felt like admitting defeat somehow, like acknowledging the loneliness out loud. But it turned out that wasn't defeat at all. It was just life, ordinary human life, where there's a neighbor named Bill who can talk for an hour about his tomato garden and the state of the country. Where there's a branch library 4 blocks away that I hadn't set foot in for 30 years. Where there's a bench at Schiller Park where people like me, older, quieter, but still here, tend to end up on a nice afternoon. I started keeping a kind of journal, not every day, every few days, just writing down what I was thinking. It seemed pointless at first. Who needs the thoughts of an old engineer from Ohio? But the journal wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. Reading back what I'd written a week earlier, I could see myself from the outside. That kind of distance helps. One evening I wrote this. I've been waiting for the kids to come back to me. But maybe I'm the one who drifted away, slowly, quietly, over many years. That stopped me cold. I started being honest with myself in a way I hadn't been before. How many times had I turned down an invitation because it was too far, or I didn't want to be a burden? How many times had I answered, "We'll see," and never followed through? How many times had I hidden my loneliness behind stubbornness and refused to ask for help when I needed it? I had been building that wall too. I just kept telling myself it was their side they weren't doing enough. That was painful to face. But it was also a relief, because if I had a hand in how things got this way, then I had a hand in how things could go from here. I didn't become a different person. I'm still me. Same temperament, same habits, same stubbornness that my daughter calls Dad's principles, with a smile that means she's on to me. But I decided that having principles is fine, and shutting yourself off is not. That you can have your pride and still be the first one to reach out. That age is not a reason to stop moving toward the people you love. Now, nearly 2 years after that October, when I was sick alone in this house and nobody knew, my life looks different. Not perfect. The kids don't live nearby, and that's not going to change. But they call. They visit more. My daughter spent a whole week here last month, no particular reason. We cooked together, drove out to the farmer's market, argued about something small and laughed about it later. My older son is talking about coming down for a fishing trip this spring. He's been saying it for a while, but this time I think it'll actually happen. I don't know how much time I have left. At 85, that question becomes more specific than it was at 40. But I know I don't want to spend whatever time there is waiting. I don't want to sit here keeping score of who called and who didn't. I don't want to reach the end of this feeling like I was left behind. If you're listening to me right now, and maybe you know that feeling too, that distance that grows between you and the people closest to you, the kind nobody announces but everyone senses, that I want to say one thing to you. Don't wait. Don't wait for them to come to you with an apology or a sudden understanding. Take a step yourself. That is not weakness. That is the bravest thing I have done in the last years of my life. Call. Drive out there. Write the message you've been putting off. Say the thing you've been meaning to say. It doesn't have to be something big and formal, just something real, something alive, something true. That's enough to change things. I'm 85 years old, and I can tell you, it is not too late. As long as you're here, it is not too late. Thank you for listening.